Good afternoon, everybody. I will read my script. Dave Greaves, Chair of the Senate Bill 1547 Rules Advisory Committee of the Board of Psychology, call this committee meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. on Tuesday, July 7th, 2026, via Zoom video conference. I will now call roll. Eddie Carrillo,
Here.
Robin Henderson,
Here.
great Lori Henry,
Here.
Vicky Larson Hills. No, Vicky? Not yet. Kate McLaughlin.
Here.
And we heard about Laura, not here yet. And I am Dave Greaves. I am here as well. So we have quorum. The committee will now convene in public session. Members of the public are instructed to refrain from making comments during this meeting. Zoom attendees who disrupt the meeting may have their microphones muted, their cameras turned off, or they may be removed from the meeting. And so we are now in session. So again, thanks all for being here today. Laurie, I got a question for you. I know this is our third meeting and we've got five scheduled. How does it look like our trajectory is going? Do you feel like we're making good time as we're making our way through this document?
I think so. I think we're getting through the toughest parts, which are like the educational requirements and the supervision
Yeah.
requirements. I think the ethics code is going to take probably a bit of discussion. I added fees to this agenda. I'm sure y'all
Okay.
saw that. So hopefully we can get through that. And then I feel like next time we'll have another updated revised version, and I'll also have hopefully a statement of need and fiscal impact to present at that time. I couldn't really draft anything up until we got more rules laid out.
Yeah.
So we'll start on that soon.
Okay. Well, let's jump back into the document and if you can help us remember where we were when we left off.
Yep. So I'm just going to get my spot. Hold on one sec. We have somebody that just joined. Maybe we can identify who's on the phone. Is it a BRAC member?
That's Laura's number.
It's Laura. Gotcha. Cool.
Hi, Laura.
Okay. So sharing now.
Got it.
So we left off, well, I guess I think it's a good spot to pick back up on definitions. We had talked about last time how we define supervised practice. I put a flag here just to bring it up again, and if anyone's considered, have we included everything we should that counts towards that 700 hours in this definition?
Oh, right. We were talking about everything that should, right? Everything that should count in the 700 hours.
Mhm.
And I think we did a pretty good job.
And it's never too late to, well, it will be eventually too late, but it's not too late yet to bring it up later if you come up with something too. I just
Yeah.
wanted to flag it to come back to.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on. So I had flagged that we're going to talk about this 175 hours. Not necessarily again with the work group, but I was going to put it in my memo. I did see Kate sent the hot off the press Nevada rules, which I quickly skimmed, and it looks like they did land on 175 hours in their proposal. So this does stay consistent with that.
And not that this is a precise thing. I have a nephew who's becoming an EMT. And I was curious because they work under supervision. I was curious how many clinical hours they need. 20 to 40 is all they need. So, and they work under supervision. This person's going to work under supervision. So I felt a little better about 175 hours. That doesn't feel too bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when we think about also like peers, community health workers who
Right.
have pretty wide latitude to do a wide range of services and have training that's more, commensurate with 40 hours, something like that. There's a less formal training. Obviously, those are different pathways, lived experience
Exactly.
pathways, but I think this is a pretty substantial amount of supervised practice for folks who are going to always be supervised for their whole
Right,
career.
right.
Okay. Then moving down. So we were discussing the supervision requirements and how basically all of the supervision, besides the post-licensure, is pre-degree. So if we're not lining up with other states, that may create some barriers to, mobility. So I just flagged that from the last discussion if we wanted to talk about this further. These are some requirements that are a little bit stricter than Nevada's rule. And I haven't had time to check the new version to see if they still don't line up, but I would imagine they don't.
So again, where we landed, I'm just see if I can remember. We need to make sure that at least once a week there's some hour of supervision, and typically that would be a group supervision. And that we also talked about was it in any given month, we need to have at least one one-on-one. Is
Yeah,
that
so this is the pre-degree, so that's why there's the must-have had language, and there's no ability for them to remedy
okay?
that if they didn't have it either as part of their bachelor's education program or that add-on
Okay.
program. So,
Okay. While in training, they needed to have at least an hour a week,
mhm.
up to 20 hours of practice. And if they have 21 or over, they need to have 2 hours. And
Yeah.
that,
And I think with Nevada, it was just 1 hour of supervision for every 20 hours. Is that right, Larry? If I'm remembering correctly, they didn't have that sort of weekly requirement. It's the A and C are things we've added that are above and beyond the Nevada requirement, which I think is captured in B.
okay.
Yeah, and B lines up with how we have for registered associate supervision for LPC and LMFT.
Okay. So are we saying that our supervision expectations for these trainees is higher than for an LPC or more stringent?
Well, LPCs aren't supervised, but for a registered associate who's a pre-licensed person going for LPC or LMFT, the B meets
That's what they do.
that. Yes.
Okay.
A the one minimum 1 hour for every week is above a registered associate because for them it's just all about monthly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting for us to think about. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this meeting and just saying we might, if we want to keep something like this, we might want to be a little more clear. Like, so let's say they saw one client in a week. And then, right, like because it's defined at the weekly level, like it's a holiday week or something, then you have one client. Does that mean you also have to have an hour of supervision that week? Like, we might just want to be a little more specific about a week where at least X number of hours of supervised practice took place so that we're not creating unintentionally some odd requirements. That was a thought I had separate from Nevada. If we retain A, we might want to make it a little more specific in terms of the number of hours that would have to be in that week to require an hour of supervision.
Other thoughts on that, on Kate's idea?
So do you think we should be switching to like a monthly model? Is that what you're saying? Rather than weekly?
Not necessarily. I just
Okay.
flagged for me as I was reviewing the notes that Laurie made on this for us to think about for today that the way we have it written right now, like, is pretty non-specific. So it basically says, like, if you saw anybody in a week, you also need an hour of supervision, which, you know, would create some kind of stringent requirements for like holiday weeks or weeks where you just had a little bit of practice, or you're making up a case or something like that. So we might want to just think about the language in A if we want to retain the weekly requirement to make it a little more clear how many hours of practice would need to take place to require that hour of supervision in the same week.
So if we said we still like the idea of an hour, at least an hour a week, but we should say if you in fact see at least this many in that week. If you see two, we feel like that might be a little onerous. And I'm thinking about these training programs too, having to scramble and provide an hour of supervision for an hour or two of practice, which might be heavy. So, Kate, you're thinking either we maybe throw a minimum up there. If you've seen at least this many in a week, you need to make sure that you get supervision that week.
Well, if we were, I don't want to, I see Robin has her hand up. I think there's a number of ways we could deal with it. If we want to keep the weekly requirement, it might be good for us to specify like, or at least 5 hours of practice took place or whatever it is. I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
5. It's just we should be specific. Or we could think about something that's like, you need to have met with your supervisor at least X number of times a month. I don't know. I think there's a range of ways we could revise that. It's just something that flagged as a place we might need to be a little more specific.
Robin, what do you think?
I'm thinking that I don't want to create undue regulatory burden on an agency who's trying to have one of these folks by blocking in there and saying, okay, you have to do XYZ every week. You have to do, you have to keep track of this in this way, shape, and or form. Thinking about things like people get sick. Sometimes supervisors are out on vacation, and who's going to actually provide that oversight and coverage, and do they have the right credential to do so? So if there's a way that we can do this without having to have people track content hours within a week, and maybe it is broadening it out to a month, maybe
Okay.
it's just saying what it is in total hours. I'm thinking about the regulatory burden on the supervising agency. That's going to be difficult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Yeah, I
will.
hadn't really thought about that, but that's totally true.
Agreed. I just
Yeah.
plugged in there the language that Nevada's using.
Okay, so they've got
That's it. It's just 1-to-20 ratio.
I like that idea of a simple 1-to-20 ratio.
Yep. And that's what we have in B. I mean, I think
Yes.
the score at least 2 hours for any week is actually, I don't know that you even need that, right? If it's just an hour of supervision for every 20 hours of practice without, I mean,
take out for any week. At least,
especially if that's what is required for LMFTs and LPCs, while they're in training, obviously those are folks who are going for a higher level of training, but because these folks are going to continue to receive supervision forever, I think that standard seems reasonable and aligned with Nevada.
so if we did it that way, we wouldn't need A. I like the idea of keeping C though, because I think we talked about having that one-on-one time, so it's not just all so
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, the Nevada rule says direct supervision. I'm not exactly sure why they're saying direct, if that means it can't be group, because what is
I don't know
indirect
what
supervision? I don't really know.
I don't know what that means. I think the way we have it written, 1 hour of supervision is fine. And then in the next point we make is that at least 1 out of every 4 needs to be one-on-one.
Maybe because they're saying it directly pertains, maybe it's just like to emphasize that it pertains to the curriculum of the education program directly, direct supervision. I don't know.
I think they're probably trying to distinguish from workforce pathways like the QMHA. I don't know what they've got in Nevada, but I suspect they're pulling in program there because this is not like, I don't know, you can't just like go get a job unrelated to your educational program and deliver some services and count those hours. They have to be kind of part of your educational training, which is in the spirit of 1540, our bill as well. That would be my
Right.
guess, although the language is not ideal.
So are we thinking delete A then?
Yeah, I think what we're moving away from that weekly requirement and going to that ratio requirement of, after 20 hours of practice that you have an hour of supervision. And then, if you move into the next 20 hour, you need to get another hour, obviously. And 25% of those supervision hours must be one-on-one.
So
And
just
then,
like that?
yep. And then C is just talking about group supervision and how many
I think in A you can delete everything that comes, or at least,
Yeah. Or
right,
they,
because that starts specifying
yeah.
weekly again, right? It's just the ratio, 1 hour of supervision for every 20 hours of practice.
Yeah.
hmm
Get rid of that
Get
Nevada
rid of that.
language. So this looks good.
That's, yeah, I think that's cleaner.
Okay. Any more on that? Okay. So here, I just wanted to point out, so F, it's not in your current draft. I flagged it because I was cruising through these after I sent that out and I was like, oh, I didn't put the application fee on here. That should probably be in here. So that's different from the draft you have. It'll be on future drafts. And then the same thing with licensure, I didn't have the fingerprinting on there. So I just wanted to note that I plugged those in. Those are just standard things that we do.
Okay.
And then I think we're good on examinations. We just need the name eventually. And then we left off here. I think this was, a good topic of debate the last rack. Sort of what are the qualifications for the licensees for ongoing supervision? I think we're pretty clear that minimum of 2 years of licensure is pretty standard for the requirement. And then we were talking about what specifically to require for training for that supervisor. So I took a shot at drafting what I think maybe are some things that would be particular to licensed behavioral health and wellness practitioners, but I also am mindful that these things need to be achievable on or after 1/1/27, which is when this bill becomes effective. We need to have supervisors like pretty quick ready to go and have this CE type training available at that time. So if it's too specific to this license type, that was where I had some concern. Somebody who has that 30-hour training that's required to be, a supervisor of a registered associate for professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, 30 hours of training is what they're going to have. They're, questionably not going to qualify under this because it has specific things in there that are like, it could have specific things that are like only pertaining to this particular profession, or do we want to make it so that they would immediately qualify? So that's,
Well, I think one thing that we brought up last time was I think the group was in agreement that whoever supervises this new discipline needs to have a little understanding about what the discipline does. And so that was part of whatever the requirement's going to be. And I don't think we felt like that needed to be a lengthy training. I could
yeah, and
even,
I think that that kind of stuff, like what's the scope and what's sort of the statutory requirements and the rule requirements, that could be part of an exam. And there was some concern about calling it an exam, and that might be a barrier. People don't want to have to do that step. So I tried to craft a different language, board prescribed assessment to verify understanding. So that's the language there. And I think that's going to be the real important part to make sure that they understand what the scope is and what the limitations are, and that profession's code of ethics, and have a test where they have to refer to those things and pass it before they can supervise.
Well, yeah. So a variety of thoughts, just given the framing that you proposal already. So if we're going to require an exam, um, I just can't remember where we left off on 10 hours of supervision training. So that 10 hours doesn't need to be all specific to this profession, right? It looks like sort of A is specific to the new profession and the rest of this is just sort of good supervision practice. Or are we saying like there needs to be a new 10-hour supervisor training that is specific to this profession? Because I do think that would be a barrier as you're describing, in terms of getting this implemented by January 1.
And 10 is an awkward number. Is there a reason that we have an awkward number?
well, and remind everyone too that psychologists don't have to take any hours to supervise
Right.
psychologists. So I'm supervising psychologists with no additional training, and now there's this bachelor's level thing that they want me to take 10 hours for. So
I would think this is more like, I don't know if this is an LMS thing eventually that can be done in a self-defined learning, because the whole point is to understand the scope of practice of this. It's not to teach people how to supervise.
yeah,
It's to understand the scope of practice of this very limited practice so that there's clarity. And can that be done in a 2-hour self-guided LMS? That's probably the easiest, because I don't know many agencies that are going to go, yay, let's go do 10 hours of supervision training so I can supervise a bachelor's level person. The easiest way to do this would be, and Kate, I don't know if this is possible, but can it be done in an LMS system?
We're working on it, and I think we can definitely have something ready for January. And I think you could embed the knowledge test in it, right? And theoretically, right? Like you just embed the knowledge test at the end of that training. I don't think it's going to be 10 hours though. The 10
No.
hours, I think, is if we're really just training in this new provider type, I mean, I think it could be certainly
2?
less than that. Yeah, 2. If you want to include some stuff about, I don't know, evidence-based supervision, you can make it 4. But I think one of the things I remember from our last conversation though was like the board of psych doesn't want to get into the business of like approving these trainings that are specific. I think we just would need to think about like what type of training do they have to get? Is there just going to be one? Is the board going to have to review these and say like, here's the 4 that, I suspect no one other than us is going to want to build one of these, but so maybe it's not really a problem. But I think we want to just think about feasibility for the board and not make this too complicated as well, that it's like an approved training about this new profession.
yeah.
Sorry, what's LMS?
No, it's like a learning management. So it's just like an online system where you take kind of a continuing ed training, and you take your knowledge test and you get your certificate, and it's all kind of bundled up into an easy to use online system that kind of does all of those processes for the person doing the training.
Lori has her hand up, and then Robin.
Yeah, so I think my question is if we're just requiring a 2-hour training specific to this, does that apply to people who have already been trained as supervisors? Because supervising in itself is a different thing than
Yes.
anything else. And so like I'm just confused, I think.
Well, I can tell you from the board's perspective, we do not want to be in the business of verifying that a social worker is a qualified supervisor or that a professional counselor is we don't want to be chasing down, like calling the board and saying, is this person good to go as a supervisor? What we want to be able to do is chase down the thing that Kate's creating. So we can at least say, okay, you've taken that part. I think we're fine getting that confirmation, but I don't know. Lori's point is a very good one. It's like, but how do we, and is that really our business? Or it goes back to what I brought up last time, which is, do we need to somehow build in that the governing boards of these different professions, they should qualify as a supervisor by their board's requirements before supervising, just something like that. Robin.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Todd and Larry. Um, I don't think any board wants to supervise this. The supervisors, David, you make a really great point, and I really like the elegance of your suggestion that you're qualified to supervise by your board, et cetera, to the concern about ensuring that people understand the uniqueness that these are not that one of these is not like the other. It could be a very simple knowledge test with a little learning management thing, very simple knowledge test. What I'm wondering is, if Kate's team builds that, is that something that Todd and Larry, your agency, owns just as an oversight? that, hey, if you want to register to be able to supervise this license type, here's the thing, here's the self-guided learning tool you need to take. You need to pass this knowledge thing, then you get your card punched and you're good to go. And then it's not in the board's purview.
Well, I guess I would want to understand a little bit more about what the scope of that training would be, because I mean, I envisioned us developing the laws and rules exam for supervisors that asks the questions about the code and the statutory scope of practice and the rules and I included a link that shows what the LPCT supervisor law and rule exam looks like. So I figured it would sort of be modeled after that, kind of like they can open book, look through their book, flip through the rules, at least become familiarized and pass that before they can supervise, not necessarily the detailed training things that the programs would teach to the licensees in the bachelor's program, if that makes sense.
So that successfully complete a board prescribed assessment to verify understanding of Oregon laws, that's not something we have right now, Lori.
Well, not for this new license type. That counselor's board has it for their supervising. Everyone has to pass that. Even a psychologist that was gonna supervise a registered associate
Okay,
has to pass that, like everybody does. So I was envisioning something
I
like
see.
that, just because having some sort of supervision training, I think, is okay. Psychology doesn't have any for psychologist residents. Counselor's board has 30 for registered associates. So I think the discussion was somewhere in between there. But the question for me is whether it should be specific to this profession, where somebody who's already on the supervisor registry wouldn't have to go out and take new training, or a psychologist. So usually when it comes to psychologists supervising registered associates, we say that 30 hours of training can be like part of that doctoral program, because as long as it's postmasters and it's in a doctoral program, most of those have a clinical supervision course that we accept. So they don't have to do anything extra.
Right. And I just want to make sure, because I think we are kind of going back and forth and there's some confusion about what we're talking about here. What you're describing here is something that psychologists don't require at all. And I don't know that they're interested in getting in on that. Um, and then we're also talking about just a basic training on what does it mean, this new discipline. And Kate, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I liked your Robin. I liked your suggestion, David, that maybe we just put in some language that says like you're an approved supervisor based on the rules of your board, basically, and just go with what each board requires of its supervisors rather than trying to dictate something different. And you've had a training that ensures you are knowledgeable about the scope of practice and the ethics and the boundaries around this new provider type. Um, and that could be reflected in, like, I think so it sounds like, well, I'm curious, maybe I'll just pause. Do others have concerns about that approach? I do think maybe we're narrowing in on that being sort of the right strategy. And I think the question is, what is that training? How do we test knowledge?
Yeah.
So
And
relying on other boards, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Lori.
Well, relying on other boards, we talked about that last time, and that wouldn't really work, because we're not just talking about the boards we have control over. We're talking
That's
about
right. Yeah.
social work. We're talking about physicians, nurse practitioners, other professions. So that would introduce some vagueness in the rule. I think it needs to be something that's like, this is it. This is not just like the other boards decide. We're just gonna sort of arbitrarily give them the power.
Well, it's not arbitrary. It's it's their power, and it's very specific how they decide how somebody's approved to license. That's
How would
kind of
we verify that, though?
well, we could have them when people apply to be licensed that they attest to the fact
Attest.
they
Yeah.
yeah I am approved to be a supervisor by my board.
Yeah.
They attest to that.
Yeah. And I think that could just be part of the test that MHRA oversees. It's just like you also provide an attestation that you're an approved supervisor for your profession. But then what I was going to suggest about, and I'm curious, Lori and Todd, what you think. If MHRA wants to develop that exam, I think the simplest way do it would be if we're going to say there's just like a training, um, certainly there could be more if someone feels so compelled to create another one, but that is focused on scope of practice and all, and so on about this new provider type, that they could just be bundled together in the way that CEs often are, that you like take an online training and for you to pass, basically, the MHRA approved, exam is just the end of that training so that you get your sort of approval to supervise from MHRA at the end of completing the training that's bundled with the sort of competence or the knowledge exam about the new provider type. I think that would be an easy way to structure it if MHRA is like willing to host somewhere, this, like if we develop it and, have a system for administering it, is that something that you could sort of live in MHRA's, I don't know, sphere somehow for people to access?
I mean, I guess I would wonder, is this like a CE thing that would come at a cost for them? Or would it just be,
I wouldn't.
It'd be free. Yeah,
I
free.
wouldn't-
And we would pay. I mean, we can figure out how to, you wouldn't have to deliver the CEs. Like it would be packaged up in a system that just like does all of that automatically. But the questions you develop could be the exam that happens at the end of that training, basically. Um, and like we post a link to it somewhere on your page about this new provider type, so that's easy for folks to access that training and pass the exam to get some kind of like supervisor certificate or approval.
Eddie has his hand up. Lori has. Let's hear from Eddie, then Lori.
This might be taking a couple steps back. I'm just thinking of what you were saying, David, earlier of like the when it comes to the different licensures that can supervise. If we only want to do it based off of like if that clinician's board has approved them as a supervisor, does that mean we'd have to go back? Because I think earlier in as I was reading it, like the other sections, it says like these are the approved, like these licensed practitioners are allowed to supervise these bachelor's level practitioners. But I don't think anywhere in there it said that they have to be approved by their board to supervise. Because if that's the case, then we may have to go back. And does that make sense the way I'm saying it? Like
I think
because
so.
when we mentioned with like LPCs and LMFTs, like you have to do in order to be approved to supervise, you have to at least do like the 30 hours of training, right? And then to be a board approved supervisor, you have to go through the other like supervision of supervision and then
Right.
like accrue the hours. So do we want to just have it as you are approved by your board to supervise, or you are at least licensed by your board for 2 years and then you can supervise, and then whatever else we decide here?
I think the difference is the hours before earlier in the document, that's pre certification, pre-license. And so
Hmm.
this is when they're in school and they're being supervised by people in their school.
Hmm.
And I think that that's a different set of criteria that they're using. So if the Balmer Institute says these are my supervisors and we feel good about them doing it and we're following those criteria. This is after they're done and they're out needing to get supervision, which they're going to have the rest of their life.
Hmm.
I think that's what is that. Am I getting that right? That they're actually different types of supervision we're talking about?
Well, it's actually a good question because I think the way the statute's written it was confusing the way it was written, but it says basically, as Eddie was just saying, this list of A through F is what the statute says. These are the professions who can provide supervision. And that's true whether you're in your training program or post
Yeah.
degree, right? Like post licensure. But I do think the point you're raising is an important one, Eddie, that actually for LMFTs and LPCs, it's quite a high bar to become a supervisor for other LPCs and LMFTs. So maybe we want to just retain what we have, is that you have a license in one of these professions and you've had it for at least 2 years in Oregon, plus whatever we land on as the like training for this provider type. That seems like a reasonable approach to me.
Because I can see a number of people that like don't want to become board approved supervisors that are just like, that's just too much. Like, I just no interest in that. But if this is an availability of I can supervise in this capacity, but it's like, oh, now I need to get the 30-hour training plus all this, never
Yeah,
mind. And then we may lose out on a pretty sizable chunk of people who may be interested in supervising.
that's a very good point. Lori, I know you have your hand up.
Yeah, this whole conversation kind of piggybacks on what I was thinking, which is I think this is why we had it as a 10-hour training to where we're not considering other people's like supervision status, that we're just kind of like, hey, this is how you supervise, this is this specific requirements, and blah blah blah, and it's just like one packaged, and now you're approved to supervise for this license, right? And so it's just, and then we don't have to worry about, the barriers of a 30 hour, or, did you get the 30 hours in your psychology training or whatever, right? It's just like, boom, that's it. And then you take the exam at the end. And then I had a second thought, which is still, as somebody who's taken the laws and ethics exam, I don't actually understand why it's being seen as a barrier. It is so simple, it is free, it is open book, it is not a barrier in my experience, but in the conversations here, it's being talked about like it's this big thing that needs to be figured out, and I'm confused as to why it's being seen as such a big barrier.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the ethics part is because Lori, that ethics, understanding law and so forth. So psychologists don't have any equivalent to that currently.
I mean, they might have had some, so it just post-master's degree training. So most psychologists are going to have a course in their doctoral program that qualifies, like we do with the LPC LMFT supervisor law and rules exam, or yeah, 30-hour
So,
requirement.
so I guess Lori's point is, I guess what I'm hearing you saying is advocating for that 10-hour idea. Um, and I would come back and say, so that means a psychologist is going to have to find 10 hours to supervise a bachelor's level person, and currently they don't have to do anything.
They might.
Psychologists.
I would definitely, because we talked about this last time, not suggest relying on the other boards to set the standards, because some of them don't pre-approve supervisors. So it would be like asking them a question that they can't answer. Board of Psychology doesn't do that.
But to the point of that is psychologists in their actual training are taking classes on supervision, and as Robin named in the chat, they're already supervising people in practice. And so like there's all these things that we're skipping over that already exist. And yes, it's 10 hours that you might have to find, but I still don't think that that's that big of a barrier to find 10 hours to be able to. If somebody said, hey, you can have this job, you just have to do a 10-hour training, I'd be like, okay, how much does it cost? It's free? Great, let's go. Right? Like I don't feel like that's that big of a barrier personally.
Robin and then Kate.
I think, when I look at that list of people who are approved to supervise, you're looking at a psychologist, a physician, nurse practitioner, social worker, LPC, LMFT, all these folks. I don't know any psychiatrist who's going to do a 10-hour training to be able to supervise. I just don't think I just don't think that's realistic. I'm curious why we can't just go with have been licensed in Oregon as described in section 1 of this rule for a minimum of 2 years, and B, complete an exam from the Mental Health Regulatory Agency that covers big A, B, C, and D. In other words, remove B and just have C within those 4 areas underneath it.
I was going to suggest exactly the same thing. And I don't think the exam is a barrier. I think we were just thinking about how to package that with the like a training that actually teaches people how to take the exam, right? Like, does MHRA want to own that or not? Maybe we don't have to decide that today, but I do think if you think about a psychologist, for example, I'm a psychologist, I'm just going to use that example, who's working in a setting and then is asked by that setting to supervise a new trainee, right, or a new provider type. But to do that, they have to spend 10 hours that they're probably not going to get compensated for, aside from CEs, to take more supervision training. This could be someone who's been supervising for years. Like, I do actually think that is a barrier that will get. And I think when you look at this list, we're going to assume any of these folks who are licensed, who have been licensed for several years, are going to have had training and supervision if they are being asked to be a supervisor. So as long as they're able to pass the exam that's specific to this new provider type, to me that seems reasonable. Or if we want to include clock hours, 10 seems high, especially since that would be, I don't know, like, would the 30 hours that LPCs already have to do to become supervisors count towards that? I don't know. So I think Robin's suggestion is a good one and would be feasible. It just makes it more realistic for folks to be willing to supervise these folks early on.
And I think Eddie, you were on that same page. You were the one that first kind of suggested this. Is that accurate?
Maybe. Partially.
I know that you were going back to the idea of, let's say, we know they've been licensed for 2 years, and we want to make sure that that's the case. This is for like people who maybe an LPC who don't want to go through the long thing, but it's easy enough to do this brief training to understand what this new discipline is, and that way they can do it because they don't want to. I've got a daughter who went through the 30 hours and it was painful for her, but she did it because she wanted to do that. But not everyone does.
So Robin's suggestion was to possibly move the big A, B, and C and D underneath B. But I'm thinking that the fact that it says Oregon laws, rules, and ethical principles related to the practice, maybe it's already covered, because I think the board has pretty broad authority about what to include in there. I mean, we could break it down by these things or just leave that out.
So you're feeling like that's redundant?
I'm not attached to it. I mean, I drafted it to try to come up with my understanding of the last discussion and kind of what this committee wanted in there, but I'm not attached to it by any means. We could just delete it.
I think it'd be fair to delete it, to your point, Larry, that it kind of covers it all the way it's written in small b.
What we'd have left then is that you've got to be licensed for 2 years, and then you have to complete the board prescribed assessment to verify understanding of laws, rules, ethical principles related to practice of behavioral health program prevention. Yeah.
And I mean, we can beef it up a little bit compared to the LPCT supervisor law and rules exam, just because they don't have to do the training, But like we've talked about before, they're not supervising people that are providing clinical services, so maybe it's not as intense, and it's more important that they understand the scope and that kind of stuff.
And then you would just, I don't know, in relation to that exam, MHRA would point to where folks could get the relevant training to pass the exam. Or, I mean, this is probably not something that needs to be sorted out today, but I think, we obviously would need some kind of training that provides, ensures people have the knowledge they would need to pass that exam.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that, when I'm working on developing the exam, I can tap on outside, folks to help with that.
Eddie, is your hand up again, or?
Yeah, I was just say, for what it's worth, like when this was all passed and before having like the RAC meetings, like A and B, the highlighted ones were kind of well, maybe not so much B, but A for sure was like my kind of understanding of who would be just kind of already allowed to supervise. So this feels like it makes sense.
Okay.
And B gives pretty broad authority for the board to sort of decide how detailed the test has to be.
Yeah.
Additional parameters. There's time for more discussion about it. I imagine maybe the education DEI committee would review drafts and help me develop it.
Yeah, that would be a good role for them.
Anything more? Are we good here?
I think so. You have a word and. Oh, okay, that works.
No, I put it in the wrong spot. I need it actually because there's a C here.
Okay. And then yeah, can't be a spouse.
Yeah. This language comes straight out of the LPCT rules.
Okay, that's a good one.
Okay. So, okay. So again, we're talking all post-license supervision, so we don't have to align with other states. But this, to me, I was like, how do we define group supervision here? I wanted to make sure this aligns with LPCT language, but does it make more sense to align it with the pre-degree requirements about what it needs to look like? Which I can go back up to that.
Lori, and then I see your hand up, and then let's go to Kate.
Mine was just quick. I just was looking, it said 6 and where you just were, and in previous dialogue, I believe it said 5, and I just wanted to wanted consistency between the 5 and the 6.
Yep,
Gotcha.
that was what I was flagging too. We should just decide, and I think probably make it the same in both places because it seems silly to
Yeah.
2 different definitions.
So we want to change it below to 6 or 5, I mean?
Well, where did the 6 come from, Lori? You said that's the LPC.
I can't remember if it's LPC or Nevada.
I like 5.
I believe in our previous discussion, we got to the consensus of 5.
Yeah.
But that's just my memory. I don't know that we can trust that.
Yeah, I don't know that we got this far. Because we talked about it for pre-degree, but not post-licensure.
Yeah, we landed on 5 pre-degree for sure. I think that's fine. And I'm thinking practically, it's going to be a while before an agency has 5 of these folks.
Yes.
So it's going to be, I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I just think consistency makes sense. So this changing it to be the same here. And then, Lori, where did you pull this from? Nevada, the supervision frequency and duration, the monthly, and the ratio, and is that where this originated?
No, it's LPCT. Or BLPCT registered associate requirements. I can't remember what Nevada was. I gotta find it.
Well, in A, we would be requiring here a 50% ratio. That 50% of supervision needs to be an individual, whereas we have 25% during training. I'm not saying that's a problem, just flagging that's an inconsistency. The total amount of supervision seems reasonable to me here, but I'm curious what folks think about the ratio of group to individual for post-licensure.
Do we want to be consistent again and make it like 4-to-1? Or one out of every 4, I should say.
I'm comfortable with that. I think, if you're talking about post-clinical, just keep it the same. I think it's going to be less of a barrier from an agency standpoint to use what is a higher license type.
That seems reasonable to me too. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It would seem odd that we would require a higher amount of individual post training than during training.
Yeah, I think sticking to that number makes sense. And again, it just makes it simpler for people to think about this whole discipline, and those ratios stay consistent.
Mm-hmm. So that would just mean A is 30 minutes monthly of at least half an hour hour monthly of individual. You have to have at least 2 hours of total supervision and 30 minutes of individual one-on-one, which seems reasonable.
Do you see that, Larry, there, big letter A?
Yeah, I was tracking down the Nevada requirement. Sorry, I wanted to make sure their new rules. So sorry, what were you saying?
And we don't
A.
have to line up with Nevada at this point, right? We're do what we want.
No. And this was actually less strict than what it was originally. So, but we can definitely scale it back now.
So we're talking about big letter
Big A,
Big A.
big A, too. Yeah, right there. I think it'd be including 30 minutes, not 1 hour of individual one-on-one.
Second line.
Second line. Yeah, right there. 30 minutes. And then in B,
Can we say at least 30 minutes?
yeah,
Just they might want to do more, but
yeah, at least 30. Yeah,
so big A again. Yeah.
right there.
That
And
Yeah.
then for B, it's 25% of 3. And then,
Gotta do math.
yeah,
0.75.
yeah, like that.
So we're changing this to
So
40.
at least 45 minutes.
oh, that's right. That would make more sense than 0.45.
I just did the 0.75 hours. Yeah.
Okay. And practically speaking, that would probably be an hour. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I would probably be doing, but okay.
Is 30 minutes of supervision good enough? I mean, that
Well,
seems
they have to have 2 hours, but 30 minutes of that would need to be one-on-one.
okay. Is that
Robin,
typical to do a
what-
30-minute supervision session?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how they would structure it, but I might do it like if I knew these are the rules, I would maybe start a group meeting for 30 minutes, and then we'd break out with individual supervisors to talk to people one-on-one for the last 30 minutes of that hour. It's probably how I would do it.
Okay. Very good with that. Then how about this may not be a staff meeting? Like, is there any other way we want to try to define what group supervision is not?
I'm curious why we're saying consultation session is not,
Yeah.
because
I was
isn't
just
that a
gonna
lot of
say-
what we're doing in there is consulting and talking about cases and things like that?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
kind of
that-
had that thought too, but this is the LPCT language, so I was like, well, I guess it makes sense there. So
I was
but yeah.
reading consultation session as just peer to peer and not with a supervisor.
Oh,
Why don't we call it a peer consultation session just to make it?
that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie.
Yeah, I had exactly the same reaction. I was confused about that too.
Because that is a
Um,
different level of feedback, consultation versus supervision.
Yeah, okay.
It looks good to me.
Okay. Um, so this is a whole bunch of the supervisor responsibilities. And I ended it with other. Is there anything else that I missed on this list? And this is very much modeled after both boards' requirements.
Okay, good. Stations, great memory release.
So are we saying that once somebody is licensed, they still have to have a counter signature? Or is this the pre-licensure status?
This is once licensed.
So they're going to have a counter signature on all their chart notes.
I assumed I assumed they would.
That's a lot.
It
I mean, you're talking
is.
about a lot of clicks in Epic. That's a lot. I part of the fact that you have a license should be allowing you to be able to sign things. Yes, you are always practicing under supervision, but I can tell you that
I see. Yes.
yeah, the physician doesn't sign all the PA's notes.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, that
I think that's
seems
a
like
burden.
a lot. Mhm.
A good point.
Because they're not doing like any diagnosing or treating. So
Right.
Exactly. There's implementing the treatment plan. Yeah.
Progress notes.
do we want
So
to
that-
put something in there like they review whether they need to or something so that that gives them discretion to decide when they need to if the situation could arise?
Well, I think we have that in B, right? It says review and evaluate appropriateness of
Yeah.
population caseload, individual charts, client progress, case records, right? Like it seems like that's encompassed in B that they're, reviewing all the relevant documentation that these folks are creating. So I
It's
don't know that.
missing professional correspondence. Should we add that in there?
Sure.
Sure.
Where would that?
That looks good.
My chart changes back off. And then
Yeah.
goes bye-bye. Anything else?
Hmm. So right now we have quarterly written evaluations of the licensee's skills and progress. So is this something that this is, the big B there.
This
Does
is
that mean indefinitely we'll do quarterly written evals?
So this requires them to do it in the background, but it doesn't require them to submit it to the board unless the board requests something. So if something came up in a complaint that concerned like quality of supervision, we'd say, hey, give us your evaluations.
Okay. So Eddie's supervising one of these folks. Every quarter he'd need to have some written, and this is something he could create himself theoretically, just some way of documenting progress.
I mean, we could create a template that's optional for them to use. Like we have that interim evaluation for psychologist residents that's optional. We only say you have to do it if the board tells you to, otherwise it's optional.
Is
there a
I'm
reason
curious.
for 3
Yeah,
years after post licensure? I get it pre-licensure, totally get it. Is there a reason we're doing it for 3 years post licensure?
What about 3 years post licensure?
Well, it says little f says create and maintain for at least 3 years and provide a copy to the board within 14 days of request. Big A and big B. This is all post licensure, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, like from the get-go. Then they would maintain it for at least 3 years, so they keep that record for 3 years.
So they do it indefinitely, and after 3 years they can start, winnowing out the older stuff, I guess.
Yeah, so if the board asks you for your evaluation and it's 4 years ago, you'd be like, I don't have it anymore. But if it was within 3 years, you should have it.
Do we think it's a reason? I mean, evaluating these folks quarterly for their
That's my
entire
question.
career seems excessive.
That's
Perhaps.
huge agency burden.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was just copying the residency and yeah, we can.
Do we feel like there's any value in doing that maybe for the first year?
For the first, yeah, I was just gonna say maybe like, I don't know, quarterly seems like a lot, but maybe like biannually for the first 2 years or something like I don't know. We can talk about what seems reasonable, but when these folks are brand new, just practicing, it does seem like, making sure there's there's something a little bit more formal to ensure they're progressing might be helpful, but to keep it time limited and as not onerous for agencies seems important.
I
Do you
can
think
get
that would
behind the
deter
first year.
folks from hiring newbies? Or
What
would
did
it,
you say, Robin? I didn't hear you. Sorry,
Sorry,
Lori.
I can get behind the first year.
Yeah.
but do you think that
So
having that for just new licensees would deter people from supervising those folks? Do you think it's worth it that they would remember to do it, that it might be just like a setup for somebody to forget it? I don't know. It's not
Oh,
continuously required. It'd just be a little bit different than our normal requirements. I mean, we can totally draft it in.
I see. So you're saying that if it's just for the first year or whatever, or 2 years, that it might be just something people aren't thinking about because they're not going to be doing it in 2 years anyway.
well, does it have to be a written evaluation? I don't know. It's like, what is the, I don't know.
I mean,
It,
I'm fine with taking it out totally. I'm not attached to it. I mean, I just thought
it
it'd
does
be kind of
seem,
similar to a resident.
it seems like keeping a record of hours of supervision is important,
Yeah.
probably.
So A is
But
good.
notes for each supervision session, I don't know. Do people even do that? Yeah,
Some do. Yeah, Lori,
but B seems like maybe excessive.
I see
So
your hand, Lori.
yeah, keeping notes from supervision is incredibly important on both sides for the supervisee and the supervisor, to document what is happening, what you're talking about, the cases, the topics, all that kind of stuff, especially for when things come up. If there's a complaint, you can go back and say, hey, on this date, I talked to my supervisor and this is what we talked about. This is the thing. And you see that come through, at least for our licensures, all the time. Um, to be able to put in your case notes that you checked in with the supervisor about what you're doing and how you're doing it, is an important side of that as well, so that it's documented again on both sides. Yes, people do it, and I often see when people are not doing it that there is issues, and part of the board's job is to protect the public, and so that's what these rules are there for. And if people are having to document the conversations that they're having in supervision, the likelihood is higher that they are making less errors.
Well, you're talking about the supervisee. This is the supervisor.
Yes, and I'm talking to both sides, but like the supervisor should take great notes to talk about this is what we talked about, to make sure that they're saying this is the advice I gave, this is the guidance that I gave, these are the rules we talked about, these are the ethics that we talked about, these are the whatever, so that you as a supervisor, say you're supervising 10 people, 10 people a week in group and individuals, keeping track of what you talked about documented, I think is really important.
So I'll confirm that, Lori. When I supervised my postdocs, I took notes, and they weren't elaborate. I didn't talk about every patient that the person saw. That wasn't the point of it. But we'd say discussed, X number of cases, talked about release of information ethics. Just, they were fairly brief, but we did have all of that. And I think I agree, particularly given we've got bachelor's level licensed people. I think that's not that big a deal. It's what anyway, I think it's a good practice. So that I think is great. Um, and the question is whether we need B, because I think if you're doing A correctly and actually supervising and making notes, that you are noting if there's deficits or other challenges,
Mhm.
that you're talking about that.
Yeah,
I don't know that you need the quarterly written evals.
So maybe
I
that's the
agree.
trade-off.
Yeah.
Keep A
Yeah,
and get rid of B.
Yeah.
that seems, yeah,
Yeah,
reasonable
because
to
with
me.
A, I mean, I can see that there is some administrative burden there, but at the same time, like Lori was saying, it helps you keep on track. It adds to public protection. It also helps you be able to defend yourself if you have a board investigation. If you can be like, hey, this is what we talked about, and it's clear. I think
Exactly.
it helps it protects the supervisor in that way as well.
Exactly.
So
So we like A. Yeah, I just don't know yeah, adds. Okay.
Are we keeping the 3 years or did we chop that down?
Oh, that this means that no, we keep that. In other words, you need to have at least the last 3 years of your notes on record so that if, I've been supervising somebody for 5 years, I don't have to have those really old notes anymore. If I want to get rid of them, I can. If I want to keep them, I can. But if an issue comes up, the board will want to see at least the last 3 years. So that's just a archive kind of guideline.
yeah, and I don't think it's too bad considering the client records retention is 7 years.
Yeah.
They're kind of like a client. So we're
Mhm.
happy with F now, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So are we good with that? Any other? We can always add later if we find something was left off.
I think requiring someone to submit their firstborn is a good line. Felt like we needed some
Sign them
levity
over to the
talking about
board.
this.
We'll put them to work. We have plenty of work to do.
Right.
Okay. All right. Are we
I
up
do
to
have
the
a question in here in terms of, okay, because I pardon my brain for getting confused between what is pre-licensure and what is post-licensure. So in a pre-licensure world, I see the board's role in knowing who the supervisor is at all times and doing that. Are we saying now in a post-licensure world that standard is still there? And so if I'm supervising, like if I'm working as a clinical supervisor at Trillium, and I have 3 of these people under my purview, I need to make sure the board knows that I have 3 of these people. I need to maintain a board supervision contract in
And
perpetuity,
tie your shoe.
the licensed individual.
I
So I
don't.
actually, that's what we're moving on to. I plugged it under the licensee's responsibilities that they need to, they're a licensed person. So this, I don't feel like the supervisor, I mean, the supervisor is responsible for signing off and doing the things to get into the contract. But it's the licensee's responsibility to submit and receive board approval of the contract at, initial or when they're changing a supervisor or employment or practice location.
In
So
perpetuity.
Huh?
In perpetuity, forever.
Yeah.
And it may be that nothing changes if you're the supervisor, Robin, and then you continue, and that licensee has you, and they don't have to tell the board anything unless there's a change.
I'm thinking about the agencies and the schools and places where these folks are going to practice. And I'm wondering what where is the difference between when I'm pre-licensed and when I'm post-licensed, right? I have, as a responsible licensee, I have to report to the board every 2 years that I've completed my CEUs, that I've done this, that, and the other thing. I have to attest to all of that every 2 years. And I get that. And periodically the board will audit me. I think I've been audited twice in my career so far. Please don't audit me this year. Just kidding.
It's too late. We're done.
I'm already there.
Until
I'm already on the list. That's it.
next year.
I'm just wondering about what kind of burden this puts on the board and on the agency to, as we get more and more of these people, to maintain some of these types of things, and what can we push to the licensee to attest to when they do their renewal every 2 years, and then it gets periodically audited, if that makes better sense.
Yeah, I think isn't that what we're trying to do here, Lurie, is to basically put this on the licensee to attest.
Well, so I think, Robin, maybe what you're talking about is living in a world where they have a supervisor, we just don't know who it is. And that makes everything above here, all these supervisor responsibilities, pretty hard to enforce when a supervisor never really agreed to that in the first place. We don't know for sure.
I just think, I mean, when you're thinking realistically about some of the places these folks are going to work, I can just say, even running this training program, like the turnover that we see in mental health agencies, the turnover we see in schools, this is going to require a lot of, a lot of paperwork to be managed by the board, to be managed by these supervisees. People go on leave. I don't know. It seems there might be a way to do this in a simpler way that still provides like some accountability. Like maybe when folks renew their license, they report on who their supervisors were. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about other ways that you have a connection to who was the supervisee should a problem occur without a contract.
Lori?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me is just I have my board member hat on here, and even in a place where there are contracts, the amount of issues that come up are there, and where that y'all are talking about is coming from this place where we're really hopeful that everything goes like wonderfully. And unfortunately that isn't true. That, there in so how is the Board of Psychology supposed to regulate if they don't have the information to regulate?
I think you could get the information without requiring contracts.
Yeah, we do need the information, to Lori's
Yeah.
point. 100%. I'm not going to be able to do anything without that. Question is, how do we get it? And you're saying, can we have just these are my supervisors?
Trust me, I like anything that creates less workload for the board, but we also have to be effective. And the other side of the argument too is that we really we have LCSWs who have provided terrible supervision. We have no regulatory authority over them because they're not part of our board. So, that could be the same problem. So I see both sides, and I'm just not sure. I did think about this, and what I landed on was that they have a contract, that it's on record. I think I'd have to stew on how it would really work without one.
I think the point of a lot of turnover is an incredibly valid one. And in a world where there's a lot of turnover, how do we regulate?
Yeah. How complicated does this contract need to be? Can it be just a matter of a couple of signatures, basically? Robin, you got your hand up. Sorry.
It's all good. I'm thinking in that light of where is the differentiation between what we do in a pre-licensure world and what we do in a post-licensure world. And when you're looking at agencies that this is all new. This is all new. We're going to have more regulatory ability with this population of licensees than we've ever had with QMHAs. So this is a step up tremendously, just because the board knows who they are, right? And there's now going to be a regulatory agency that's got a background check and a history. So when something goes wrong, we're going to be able to track them at a statewide level, which we can't do with the QMHAs that we currently have right now, which is the kind of bachelor's level population that's out there right now. That's not tracked by a licensed agency. That's not tracked at a state level. And it's not even required that agencies follow and have that. So in my brain, I'm trying to figure out when I get my license, and this is going to come out sounding really crazy, but bear with me for a second.
We're with you.
What's my freedom when I get my license? Where does the board now trust me because I'm a responsible licensee?
Yeah.
I just feel like there's so many registered associates that botch this, and they just practice without a supervisor, and they do things outside of their contract already, that letting it just be unregulated how many licensees that are responsible for this are just going to be practicing without a supervisor, without the board really ever being able to catch that? And I
I
guess
don't
we could
know.
audit it.
I don't know if there's going to be that. First of all, we have a small N, and that's going to be the case for a while. And
True.
maybe I'm optimistic, but I'm hoping that these are people recognize that they're going to need to be careful early in their careers here and follow the regulations that we've established, and that we need to know who their supervisors are. And I don't know if it's sufficient to say when they give us their hours or whatever that they say the following individual has agreed to, and we have a formal arrangement that they will supervise me. Lori?
Yeah, I just think that when we're doing these, I think we need to think more long term than short term. Short term, there's going to be a few people and that kind of stuff, but like if we're looking 20, 30, 40 years down the road, did we set this up for success, right?
Yeah.
So I just heard that a few times and just wanted to kind of note that we should be looking longer down the road. And that's kind of where I'm is like in 20 years how are these going to apply, and is it going to cover what we mean for it to cover? Um, yeah,
Right.
that's all.
And also, I think to that point, Lori, in 20 years, there's going to be a lot of them theoretically. And so, whatever we do, we want to do it in such a way that it doesn't hammer the board to the point where it's just untenable for us to try to manage all of these things. I
I
think we're all
mean,
in agreement. Go ahead. Maybe not, but I think we're in agreement that the board wants to know who the supervisors are. Does that seem reasonable?
I just,
but
again, you're talking about in a post licensure world. You want to know who the supervisor is in real time. Why is it not? I'm trying really hard to understand why we can't somehow attach this to their licensure renewal and an attestation and a licensure renewal. I hereby attest that I have had XYZ supervision, et cetera, et cetera. And I know board associates, again, are under a board contract. Board associates are under a board contract until they get their independent license. And these folks don't have an independent license. Are there lessons we can learn from how the PA board manages a dithered individual and what kind of reporting the PA board requires? Maybe that's a statute we should look at, rules that we should look at.
Lori?
Dithered.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what Robin was just saying is maybe having that when they renew their license every 2 years, that one of the questions that they answer is over the last 2 years, I was supervised by these people.
mhm.
And so it's a retrospective of who they were supervised with, but every 2 years they're at least documenting who's been supervising them.
Yep. I was going to suggest exactly the same thing, Lori, that feels like low burden for agencies, still gives the board the information they need. Now, if something comes up in real time, right, like you would obviously get the person to submit at the time there's some kind of concern who their supervisor is in that moment or at the moment that whatever unethical infraction or putative one occurred. That seems reasonable to me. And when we think about billing and all this, these folks are going to bill up through their like an agency can't, and billing without a supervisor. Like I just think, it's different with psychology associates who are having this expectation of like, independent licensure forever and lack of over. I don't know much about psychology associates and the unethical things they do. You all probably know much more about that than I do, but I can't even imagine a context where these folks would be able to practice for a day without a supervisor. They're not even going to be able to bill independently. So, I think some of those concerns are maybe mitigated here by some of those structures as well. So that what Lori is suggesting seems like a way to get the board what they need and reduce burden for agencies that are employing these folks.
I'd like to add that if the requirement is the same as it is for the other boards under the MHRA, that they need to update the board if they change jobs. So within, I think it's 14 days. Right. So if that requirement is there as well, then we know at least like where they're working. So we can, if something comes up, there is at least that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to bring up, so the psychology board does have, I mean, it's sunsetting, but the psychologist associate master's level license that did require ongoing post-licensure supervision, and we did have contracts. We did require the same supervision contract for those folks. But I can see like having some sort of attestation at renewal. It's going to be every 2 years, so it's not going to be super frequent, but for them to say, these were my supervisors during this period to this period, like an attestation.
Mhm.
And then building something into the rules around the licensee's responsibilities that they must inform their supervisor and ensure that, I mean, the supervisor, and that's the other thing too, like how are we going to vet the supervisor's qualifications? It's like they just have to read the rule and know that they're qualified, because that's what we would do in a supervision contract or in a registered associate plan. We would vet that the supervisor met, that had the law and rule exam, that had the training or whatever else. And so this creates a scenario where they're self-regulating that.
Right. Again, up above, it's you've done this for 2 years and you've been licensed for 2 years and you've had this content training on, I mean, I think that's what we talked about earlier today.
Well,
And I
you'd
guess we
catch
could
it,
build,
right? If they submit who their supervisors are, you're going to have a list of approved supervisors who have passed the test, right? I mean, I think I think these folks, knowing that they're going to lose their license if they're practicing without, and they're going to have to attest at the end of 2 years who their supervisors were. And there's an easy mechanism to ensure those folks actually have passed the rules, exam, or the knowledge exam that gets built. That seems like a reasonable check to make sure that their supervisors have, and I think we can assume as part of these folks getting jobs that they're going to have to play a role in ensuring that, the agencies that's hiring them has a supervisor who actually can supervise them.
so then we add under the licensee's responsibilities, something about ensuring their supervisor has met qualifications and understands their responsibilities under section 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. And
I think
that they'll have to attest to that every whatever, for renewing their license. They have to
Well, yeah,
attest
we
to
would have to add it in here too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be
I mean,
Lori.
yeah, I just I the assumption that people are going to do the right thing is just where I keep getting stuck. Um, Sitting through the 6, 7, 8,000 page documents that I read every 2 months as a board member of issues that have come up of licensees, and these are, people under supervision, you know. The assumption that people are going to do the right thing is not there for me when it comes to this as a board member. And so I love the optimism, but I also like want to bring in a realistic view that, not everyone is going to be on it with paying attention to when does my own license expire? When does my supervisor's license expire? Are they even a supervisor? It's a lot to assume that people are going to be doing the right thing, even within agencies, especially within agencies where there's so much going on and so many details to pay attention to. I just don't know what the right move is, but I wanted to name the concern that I have around the beautiful optimism.
Well,
so instead of having the
frankly,
burden up front, you're having the burden behind, like, instead of catching it like at the beginning that they're like, oh, you didn't do the training, or oh, then we're left with the board trying to deal with it after the fact. How do we deal with somebody who's now violated and maybe practice for a long time without being in compliance, and we just haven't caught it.
Right,
Well,
which creates other issues, like you're putting more burden on the regulation board, you're putting more paperwork and things on other board members. Like there's, and then people are upset because they're getting in trouble all the time. Yeah.
well, I wonder if I mean, I think that I'm trying to be mindful of reducing administrative burden as much as possible for agencies and supervisors. Um, what if, is there a way that you could require um, the supervisee to, like, as Lori was suggesting earlier, sort of submit something to the board when they are employed in a new place and who the approved supervisor is? And that is the way to check prospectively, like before anything happens, that person they're listing as their supervisor has completed the exam, right? I mean, MHRA is not going to be able to check on whether they've been licensed 2 years. I think we'll have to just assume folks are being honest about that one, but that, you're obviously going to retain a list of who's taken that exam. So that provides, an opportunity to ensure before practice is happening that folks have an approved supervisor. And it's not the supervisor or the agency's responsibility, it's the licensee's responsibility to do that.
I would think that we could put a question in the test that says, please, what are you licensed as? Put in your license number and your date of licensure. Very few people are going to lie about that, right? Very few people are going to flat out lie on something that's so easy to check. I'm wondering if there's if the onus of responsibility is, if you as a supervisor, and this is probably something that also goes in the exam, if you as a supervisor are supervising someone and you haven't completed this exam, you're putting your own license at risk, because that's a board reportable offense at that point.
Yeah.
And that's I think one of the ways to get around some of the issues that we're talking about. What I'm sensitive to is that these folks are going to be working primarily, again, in nonprofit environments of small companies that are seeking to have a higher trained, better trained option without having to have some of the, risks that they have right now. Again, in the QMHA world, QMHAs are not a regulated industry in any way, shape, or form. So we're trying to move our entire practice to a higher level. I don't want to make it overly burdensome for the board. I don't want to make it overly burdensome for the licensee or for the agency they're going to work for, because then people aren't going to make that switch. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And that'd be bad.
Yeah. And I do agree. I can't imagine scenarios where people would lie about kind of their own credentials as a supervisor for something like this. And that's not optimism. I think that's pragmatism. This is not practical for people they just wouldn't do that. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, they don't benefit in any way from, being able to be a supervisor for the
Oh. So, yeah, and I don't know that this would be any less powerful than a contract. I mean, because I wouldn't know that I'd trust a contract any more than I trust this. People aren't going to be honest, in this range. They wouldn't be with a contract either. So,
yeah. Well, and I just think, per Robin's point, and thinking realistically about not making it too difficult for the folks who want to hire these people, is there a way we can set it up to put the requirement on the licensee to report who their supervisor is and where the place of employment is? Like, in some kind of way that's, I don't know what exactly the right system would be. It sounds like a 2-year retrospective might be less desirable for lots of reasons. Like, what is the mechanism for getting folks to report that? So it's the licensee's responsibility, not the agency who is employing them.
I don't know, Larry or Todd, I'm thinking about, I mean, could we have a portal where people just go in annually to say, no change to my supervision
Mhm.
status, or I'm now working at this agency under this person's supervision, and they have agreed to supervise, and I attest that they have agreed to supervise and are qualified to do a supervise me.
Well, the closer we stick to the way the boards have it now, the less difficult it is to develop it. We do have a vendor that has limited the amount of requests and what we can do in the current system until we get a new system. So that's definitely a challenge.
Okay.
Building something that's very new would be difficult, which is why I had sort of built it around like kind of like the residency structure. It would just be like a tweak to the way the board's current process is. So, like, so counselors board, they have like a workplace that's a little bit different. So psychology has like private address and public address basically, whereas work site with counselors board is something we could do, or they like are adding each supervisor from start date to end date, work location, and they're expected to go into the licensee portal at any change and update that.
So let me throw an idea out here. You look there under 6, licensee responsibilities. What if we make the language under A, submit and receive board approval of supervision verification
Mhm.
prior to initiating professional services and when changing a supervisor employment and or practice location. So we've taken the word contract out. We just call it verification. Now, what we can decide is how we do that. Um, And if that's because it says, ensure supervisor access and consistent supervision, do we just ask for an attestation uh, when changing a supervisor, and then, if no changes have occurred within a 2-year period, that status is confirmed at the time of CE submissions or something like that.
Well, if it's something that they report with renewal, then I'd want to plug it in down here somewhere. If
Well,
it's
it would
something that
be.
they ongoing must maintain, I'd want to have it up here.
Well, I think what I was saying is that if you make a change, because this says when changing a supervisor, so yeah, up there we would want to know from them. But if no change occurred, then we could say if no changes occurred between submissions of CE requirements, that can be attested at the time of submission of CEs or something like that,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
I think supervisor verification, you know, do we really want to say board approval, or do you just want to say you submit to the board supervisor verification? Like, is there going to be an active process 3 where the board is like reviewing these and
Well, whether it's a
verifying?
verification or a contract, I don't think
Yeah.
that takes away the workload a whole lot. Like, I feel like if we're getting it, the expectation is that we're reviewing it. If they're creating a record and we're just like passively accepting it, and then it comes up later, that person was totally unqualified, and they come back and say, well, I
Good
entered
point.
that into the portal and you guys didn't tell me that was wrong, so it's your fault. Like that
Yeah,
is
that's a good point.
Although
so
the
I feel like we're
verification
stuck in a
is,
spot between like total hands off. The person at renewal just says, I'm in compliance and that's it. Versus we scale it up and they tell us who, versus we scale it up and they have to tell us who contemporaneously, versus all the way up to contract, like somewhere in that spectrum of board control and approval. And
well, it
Um,
seems like we want to know, the board wants to know who. And I think the question is, do folks feel comfortable with that happening at perhaps, at license renewal? Or does it need to be a more, in real time kind of thing?
or do we just leave that point A? So we only need to hear from you when there's a change. You may be at an agency for 5 years and there's no change, so we don't have to hear from you, in fact. There's no point in us hearing from you at your CE submission because there's been no change. Just let us know when a change has occurred in supervision of your supervisor, your employment, practice location, let us know.
That's just as much workload though. I mean, that's how it kind
Yeah,
of
it
currently
is.
is, like at initial or when changing.
Yeah, but what we're not doing, we're not going to this and also every 2 years when you submit CE, if nothing's changed, let us know. We don't need that anymore. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the CE would probably take them through that step, or the renewal form would be like, okay, now report your supervisors. And
Well,
if
I'm
there's
just
nothing,
saying,
you'd leave it blank.
I would say I don't even know we need that on the semi-annual or the biannual CE submission. There's been no changes. They would have told us if there's a change, and that's what we're asking them to do.
Or we could be as passive as to have them attest to being in compliance and that they are maintaining their audit record of who supervised them on a form that we could create and have them update. And then if it comes up or we audit them, then they provide us that form and we look at it.
Yeah. So I'm curious where the group is in terms of how how much we want to get into this in terms of passivity, or what's the opposite of that?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, David, Lori, Todd, you all are the ones who are going to have to do, you know, implement this, so, and I don't know how it works exactly for psychology associates in Oregon, but I think it's, would be useful to just realistically think about workload. How often would the board review this kind of information? What level of detail is needed? And just, I think the question for folks is, do we feel comfortable with just a retrospective reporting of information if we're going to require that information of who your supervisors were? It seems to me like that would be an easy thing to add as part of your license renewal. Like, who were your supervisors and what were the dates of supervision? That should be easy to check against a list of approved supervisors. So you can't renew your license if your supervisors listed there are not on that approved list. And I think the question is that enough? Or do folks feel like there needs to be a more like real-time reporting so that you are catching, hey, someone isn't actually an approved supervisor closer in time? But that, I feel like, David and Lori, I sort of defer to you because you're the folks who are going to have to do that work. And how quickly is the board realistically going to check this information?
Well, we do this for psychologist residents. We do this for registered associates on the other board. So it seems a little bit foreign to me to say, these are the requirements for supervision. This is how you qualify. This is what the supervisor must do. And then it's just the licensee telling us who complied with that without any board approval or intervention. It just seems foreign and kind of odd.
Well, I could see a standing agenda item, Lori, in our board meetings that's, supervision verification for this license or something like that. And we have a list of people who submitted things like we do for some other thing. And the board members will have reviewed that to see if there's any concerns. I could see us kind of, batching approval for those as they come in each meeting.
Well, we don't usually use the board to approve unless it's like an unusual situation, new licenses, residents, anything like that.
Oh, so I thought you just said that that's what we do for residents, and
Well, board staff does, not the board
I
members.
see.
Yeah, it's a delegated authority. So we only bring unusual situations. So staff is, reviewing those and approving them. And we already have that process sort of set up. And another
Okay.
thing I want to mention is that what we're doing now is not set in stone. This is a rule. So if we implement something and later we're like, this is becoming a challenge, there's problems here, we could definitely talk about changing it.
So what
And
do you advocate, Lori? I mean, I think verification is easier than contract just because contract is going to require getting signatures from supervisors or employer, but having the supervisee be able to kind of own the process of reporting who's their supervisor and, at whatever time cadence we want seems like it reduces administrative burden. I'm curious what people think the level of intensity around how frequently that needs to be reported to the board, where and what you would recommend, Lori.
I'm still sort of leaning towards this contract. I mean, I hadn't really considered that turnover might be higher than, say, a registered associate that we already deal with. But it seems a little bit weird to me to hold the supervisor to these responsibilities and standards when they haven't even signed up for it. And this licensee is just designating them. We don't have any agreement.
We don't have it other than the word of the licensee who says, yes, they have agreed and they are qualified.
Well, but we can check that they've signed up for it, right? By taking the test.
Yeah.
That just means that they signed up to be a supervisor, not necessarily that person's supervisor.
Yeah.
Well, is there something easy we can do that's just sort of like one of these like DocuSign kind of things? Like you get a thing that's sent to you that just says like, yes, I verify this person is my supervisee.
Well, and would it hurt to just get a signature from that supervisor? It may not be that.
I mean, the resident supervision contract is like pretty short.
Yeah, it can
I
be a
can-
short contract, and I don't think it's too onerous to ask the supervisor to sign it. So,
I can plug it into the chat so you can see what it looks like. I can find it. There it is.
so that's the contract.
So it's 2 pages and it just kind of has some where you work in. Is this a new or changed form? Who is the supervisor? And sign it.
And then people submit these online or do they have to mail them to you?
So when you first apply, you upload it through the application form. Since they're going to have to be supervised from the get-go, it goes along with their application. So we're reviewing that as part of their approval. And then if there's a change, there's a way to go into the portal and request to submit a new one. You just upload it and then it goes into the queue for our staff to review it and then approve it.
Robin, your
Um,
hand up. Are you there, Robin?
Sorry, I was having trouble getting off mute.
Okay.
At the risk of extending this conversation to another meeting, I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea to reach out to a few of the agencies that are going to be working with these individuals and get an impression from them about what they think about this proposal around specific to supervision. Because they're the ones who are going to have to implement this and maintain it. And I'm just wondering if maybe they have some wisdom we haven't thought of.
Hmm.
Yeah, we've got 15 minutes left to either trudge through this or move on to something else or talk about what we're going to talk about in the next meeting. I was kind of hoping to get to fees so that we could then review fiscal impact at the next meeting. I could draft something.
Well, why don't we put a pin in this? Since we spent a lot of time on it, folks can think about it. Maybe I can certainly consult with a few of the agencies who have hired the first graduates from our program. Just clarifying, Lori, basically the supervisee is the person responsible for submitting this,
Yes.
not the supervisor.
Yeah,
So-
they get the signatures, they get it all filled out, and then they upload it in the portal. And then that goes into the queue for our staff to review. So it's a process, and I like the fact that I can just sort of tweak our current process in the licensing system and not have to create something new that the vendor might struggle with or might cause delays in our creating this.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's come back to this. I think it'll be more productive. Let it cool off a little bit, and think it through. I think we're in agreement practically in terms of the information that we need. We just have to figure out how do we get it in a way that it's going to be useful and have some meaning. And we have some sense that it's legit.
Yeah, so I can plug in a placeholder and maybe even come up with a draft idea or two on alternatives to this.
Great.
Just so we can think about it in between. Okay, so then just wanted to mention I think we can talk about maybe client records next time. I mean, I don't know that this profession, it makes sense to have records maintenance rules when they're pretty much always going to be working for an agency. So that's something to think about for next time. The ethics code, I'm starting a draft of something that kind of deals with the kind of awkwardness of having aspirational stuff in a rule when rules are supposed to be enforceable, and how we're going to draft around that. So I'm going to work with our legal counsel and come back with a actual rule layout draft that's based on what you have in the packets. So we'll talk about that probably next time as well. And where did fees go? Fees. So we have thoughts on the fees being the same as for psychologists. And I have a handout that I can switch over the screen share to.
I think that we reduce the fees. Well, first of all, some of this stuff is in statute, isn't it, Lori?
The board has discretion to establish these fees, so we can do this in rule based
Okay.
on. So the statute creates parameters. Let me just switch over my screen share.
Because I just remember we ended up reducing it just knowing that like the earning potential of these folks is a lot lower than a psychologist's, at least initially. I mean, for students who have come through a more traditional bachelor's pathway, they're younger, So I think I can't remember what in statute the fees that were established were. I think are they ceilings, something like that? Like it can't be higher. I can't remember what it is in statute, but
So
we
the only
made
thing
some
the statute lays out is civil penalty authority, and that is the same as what counselors and therapists board was. So it's 2,500. It goes up to 5,000 for unlicensed or the more extreme violations. So basically, the statute says that the board collects fees for these various things and delinquent fee, and that they shall not exceed the cost of administering the regulatory program of the board. So that means that it should about mirror what it costs, in which case we can't, if we're assuming the staff time and the cost of implementing this is going to be about the same as a psychologist, we can't say, well, they make less money, so we're going to charge them less, because that would be putting cost on the psychologist licensees. We'd be bearing the burden of this other license type, and we can't pass that on. Does that make sense? It needs to be what the actual cost is. We can't have them make up for the difference, which is why this chart here is kind of, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't see the chart, but I know the license fees for psychologists and where they rank in terms of psychologists nationally. And I am not comfortable hanging a bachelor's level credential with that level of licensure fee, because that's going to get, when they're employed, they're not going to be, they're going to be working in agencies where they're not going to be compensated at that level, which is part of why I'm trying to make this a lot less administratively burdensome, so that it doesn't have the same level of burden on the board.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because right now, I think Lurie's point is an hour of administrative time costs the same whether you're doing it for a psychologist or a bachelor's level person. And so should we charge, because if we charge them less, then somebody's gonna have to pick up that extra slack.
Yeah, statutorily, we can't have psychologists subsidizing this other license type. So my effort here in this chart was to say, okay, do I think that responding to application related questions is going to be any more for psychologists versus the new license type? I don't see where that would be different. So the gray areas are the only things where it would actually be different. So because psychologists, there's APA accreditation. So when we go to review that transcript, it's easy. It's like, are they accredited? Yes. So that's, this review transcript to ensure degree conferral date and accreditation standards are met. We do that for both. But for the new bachelor's level license, staff has to sit down and look at course by course requirements, because that's how the educational requirements are laid out. That's going to cause actually more workload. So I kind of looked at the both things side by side, and I feel like they're going to balance out and they're going to be about the same workload. That's just the way I analyzed it. Kind of looking at each workload task.
Sorry, I didn't I thought you were done, Lori. Sorry about
Go
that.
ahead.
Well, I think that what you're saying sounds reasonable, but $600 for a new license for someone working at this level is really high. I'm just going to say, right? Like these folks are going to make 50, 60 grand a year. Realistically,
Real, yeah.
that's a big financial cost.
And maybe that much. They may not make that
Yeah,
much.
maybe.
I think
In schools, it will be less. In healthcare, we're seeing our first graduates make around 60.
okay.
So I don't know. What you're saying, Larry, makes perfect sense in terms of like, how we should think about it. I just flagging that feels really high in terms of a renewal fee for someone at this level.
Lori?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I thoroughly agree. And then it becomes a burden that a barrier to people actually getting this license and maintaining it if they can't afford it.
And
Right.
yeah, and are we talking about that much for every license renewal? They would have to spend that much?
Yeah, and this doesn't even account for implementation costs of this new license, which are completely unfunded. The legislature did not allocate any funds to the board, so the psychologists are already eating those costs essentially. This just looks at straight up how much does it cost to do each license. Once we have all the system changes, website changes, rulemaking changes, everything that goes into this.
And is this also true for like LPCs? Are they on the same fee schedule as psychologists?
Theirs is lower.
And how do they get away with being lower?
So all the board's fees have been reduced since MHRA was established. We've come up with efficiencies and different things, but there's still a few key things holding psychology back.
Okay.
One of them we actually sort of took care of in the last session, the inability to assess disciplinary costs. Psychology board had to eat up all those costs. Now there's this sort of tiered structure where it can recover some of those costs. Counselors board has always enjoyed that. If they, the respondent is not successful, the board gets to recover costs. Psychology board had to support multi-day big hearing expenses for pro se psychologists that just felt like fighting back, that kind of thing. The other thing is the education exemption loophole that lives with the Board of Licensed Professional Counselors and Therapists. So all the unlicensed practice cases where Counselors Board has no authority to go after the unlicensed practitioner because they don't have a qualifying degree, all those get kicked to Psych Board,
Okay.
who are mandated by statute to investigate them. And Lori's laughing because she knows that discussion comes up pretty frequently.
Sorry, David.
So that's
Yeah,
another
yeah.
burden that is specific to the psychology board. We've tried twice to close that loophole, and there's some fear out there about the board regulating in ways that the public doesn't like if they get that authority. So it stuck with Psych Board.
Robin?
That all makes really good sense, and given some of the things that we've seen happening with the private for-profit adventures from out of state trying to, have unlicensed care in Oregon, I'm glad somebody has the ability to regulate unlicensed practice. Is there a reason that we can't? What is the LPC rate, and is there a reason that we can't use the LPC rate?
For this profession, because it's not that board that's regulating it.
Well, I guess
I
the point
understand
is
that, but it's the same agency.
some MHRA runs both of those, and one charges less.
I think the biggest thing is just it's a math issue. It's the denominator when you're dividing cost of doing the boards versus the number of licensees whose renewal fees create that revenue.
Yeah,
I get it, but it's the same agency. I mean, if we need to go after legislation to fix this at an agency level, that makes better sense than creating a barrier that bachelor's people are never going to be able to afford a biennial $600 dues. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that would be talking about like a combined board. In that world, you'd have, so each board has its own board meetings and those cost money. Each board meets every other month. And that overhead for a board with 10,000 licensees, counselors board, is a lot less than a board that has getting close to 3,000 now, psychology. Like there's expenses that are particular to that board that can't be divvied out.
Help me understand why the counselor's board is less despite having more license. It seems to me like the cost should scale with the number of licensees, right? Just in terms of like complaints you have to do, you're reviewing and
Yeah.
there's the work of reviewing the number of licensees you have.
It's just how like in any other similar operation. So some costs of the counselor's board go up relative to the number of licensees, the cost per doing business each day. But some of the overhead we pay here, the service fees we pay to the Department of Administrative Services, the cost for putting on a board meeting, those are very similar across the two boards. Yet then counselors have a huge number that we can spread that. So I would say it's not so much the direct services, but it's then the other pretty significant a significant part of our budget is just paying to open the doors.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't like say we have a big expensive contested case hearing on the psychology board side. We can't take counselors board fees to cover that. It needs to stay within that profession. And so by sticking the new bachelor's level in with psychology, that's that cost sharing pool now where it lives.
Yeah, and I'm sensitive to time, folks. We're about 2 minutes from the top of the hour, and I do want to honor that. I really feel I agree with a lot of people that I'm very anxious about this high fee. I'm not quite sure if there's a solution that I can think about yet, but I want to go on record as saying that I worry about how high that is. I think that's pretty rough. So
Yeah. I guess Todd and Loree, maybe if you could think about, are there parts of implementation of this that are like one-time sort of fees or things you could imagine that could be subsidized in another way aside from licensure fees and renewals? And I think we could maybe think creatively about how to generate some money to cover, especially while the number of licensees is really small, some of the real costs for MHRA around this that would take some of the burden off licensees.
One thing I would suggest is take a look at the structure we have. And I mean, honestly, one of the things we might have to look at is there some level of structure of regulation in here that actually can be backed down. From a higher level policy perspective, one of the things that the legislature did when they put this in was made a decision that this is going to be regulated at the far end of the spectrum, which is regulation through a licensing board. Compare that to, say, MACBO in the state where they don't have any statutory authority. They are not charged to provide due process to folks they yank their certifications from. So they have a much lower cost because their overall regulatory authority is less. So that's part of it. Just the decision to put this under a board is going to drive the cost up some. So one thing we could look at is, in the structure we currently have, is there something that maybe the group needs to look at actually reducing the level of regulation that goes in, especially if it's a high personnel cost feature.
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah, did I miss something in this list that justifies psychologists being higher? Because the way I look at it, they're pretty much on par. I don't think we're going to have more investigations of these compared to psychologists, or necessarily they're going to need more help in the application process. I think a lot of it's going to be very similar. It's going to come down to the unique requirements.
Yeah, well, I think, Todd, that might be the solution, might be if we can just look at lowering the administrative costs in terms of what we are actually doing as a board, or what we feel like we can let go of.
Yeah, maybe that's relevant to our conversation about supervisor contracts.
Yeah,
But
I was just going to mention that. I kind of stayed quiet on the issue, but in the discussion, I'm sorry, I know where I'm dragging it beyond 4. But one of the things to keep in mind with something like a contract, initially, could be described as an added barrier that we don't want. But what I have found is when you have something like a contract up front, folks have to sign and commit to a certain behavior. When you have something where you're verifying after the fact, we have some things like that that we regulate. And what you end up with is the folks who aren't committed to doing it right, then you get mired down in a lot of discussion over, geez, I forgot, geez, I wasn't aware, geez, I've been practicing for a year without being actually licensed or being under supervision. So there's a cost. Up front, it's a little more burden, but you're hitting everybody. On the backside, you're doing the verification, and then a relatively smaller few eat up a significant amount of time. And in the meantime, you have not had the public protected that you're trying to take care of.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that
it may
makes
seem
sense.
like a little more work up front, but it shifts it to upfront in terms of board costs for enforcement and public protection versus back end when we're investigating and dealing with people that messed up and have problems.
Well,
Ideally, what we can do too is we're probably at a minimum year out from hopefully having a new licensing system, maybe longer. And obviously, we will look to automate everything that we can. You mentioned DocuSign. We don't have authority to do DocuSign. In Montana, we did use it. It does make it helpful. Some licensing systems allow non-licensees to have a login to the system. So you could have a supervisor give them an account and they could just go in and electronically sign things, which ideally should be even easier than having somebody sign it, scan it, upload it, things like that. That's all longer term.
Yeah. All right, folks, we're going to land the plane here. I think we're going to have to come back to the fee and supervisor thing that we talked about. I appreciate everyone's input, and I think we got some clear understanding of what the issues are here that we have to deal with. So thank you, everyone, for chipping in today. I think we're getting together again at the end of this month, if I remember right. I think the 27th might be the next one.
Soon. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Let me do my adjournment statement. This meeting of Senate Bills 1547 Rules Advisory Committee is adjourned at 4:03 p.m. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks all.